Welcome to Missed Opportunities for Good, the podcast where we open up a space to have conversations about trends, campaigns, and cultural moments at the intersection of marketing, advertising, and impact.
Hi, I'm Alana Ficalora.
Hey, I'm Steph Belsky.
We're social impact strategists, colleagues, and friends who are on a mission to revolutionize the industry we love.
Listen, today there's a lot of virtue signaling, greenwashing, green hushing, cause washing, or companies saying nothing out of fear of getting it wrong.
Whether it's a moment or a movement, it still has to be real. It has to be authentic and aligned with the brand, not just performative. It's about the action being taken that goes along with the messaging.
So we're here to highlight who's doing it well, what could be better, and how companies can stop leaving money and the potential for real social change on the table.
Our guest today on Creative Conversations is Mike Hauer. Welcome to the podcast, Mike.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be here on the publication day of my book.
Congratulations.
Big day.
Yeah, it's been a lot of work. I just finished a 2-week book tour where I went to New York, DC, and then San Francisco, and I did a virtual event all a month before my wife's due date. So luckily
Having all the babies together.
Oh my God. It was actually funny on the way back from DC. I had to stop real quick in Vegas on the way back to Sacramento. And I got a text from my wife that she's like, "Oh, baby's doing great. Huge cheeks." And I'm like, I call her. I'm like, "What the?" She had just had an appointment and I freaked out. I was just like, "Oh my God, did the baby come in the last 5 hours I was on the plane?" Which obviously it's not going to happen. But yeah, thank God. Yeah, baby's still in there.
Good.
So we're kind of in that wait any day now.
Wow, amazing.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
By the time this goes live, there'll be a new human in
There
the
will be.
world. You'll have a little bundle of
Pretty
love.
crazy.
Oh, amazing. Well, the first question we like to ask our guests before we introduce you officially is to ask you why you do what you do without literally saying what you do. So what's your why?
Yeah. I talk a little bit about this in the preface of the book. And for me, my kind of career journey as corporate sustainability communicator, it was not linear like most people in this space. I always like to say that the dots connect in retrospect. So you're starting your career out, you're just kind of trying one thing and trying the next thing. And then, eventually you look back, you're like, "Oh yeah, that led me to this and this led me to that." And then it seems like you knew what you were doing all along, but you weren't. But I always kind of had a vague vision of what I wanted my life to look like and what I wanted to do, the impact I want to have in the world. And writing was always a passion. The same teacher for 4th and 5th grade, Gary Rohr, actually, shout out to him in the book.
Yeah.
He was the first teacher I had that made me feel smart. Because, I was like an okay student, but I wasn't like above average or below average. But then he was the first teacher that was like, "You're really good at writing." And whether or not it was true, it made me feel that I was good at it. And it maybe became like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
And so writing really became my kind of like my outlet. And I was a lot more shy back then too. I still kind of am most writers were kind of introverted extroverts. I'm extroverted to a degree, but then like I need to go back to my man cave and recharge. And writing is one way I've always done that. And I always love that how writing and communication can change the world. And whether history nerds or even just looking back to founding documents of the United States, we were able to literally change systems and everything through the written word and through how we communicate. And I was looking for a way to apply that. And I didn't even know sustainability was a career path when I was in college. And I actually thought about a lot of different paths. So I was thinking about law school for a while because I was a political science undergrad. And I spent some time in DC interning on Capitol Hill, and I really liked that. But I ended up not doing law school, thankfully. That would have been a mistake. But then my first job out of college, I kind of just happened into a PR job, and I didn't even know what PR was. I graduated during the Great Recession, and I kind of just needed a job. And then somebody was like, "Oh, you're good at writing and communicating. You should work in PR." And I still remember Googling, what is PR? and I was like, okay, that sounds cool, I guess. And got a job doing that. And some of the clients happened to be like, this was around 2009-ish. They weren't calling it climate tech back then, solar clients and energy efficiency. So I was very intrigued by this concept that you could make a living and make a difference. Because I've never been like I just want to maximize profit. I grew up with a certain standard of living, so I want to maintain that too. So kind of finding that balance between making a living, making a difference. And so long story short, I did that for a little while. And then I like to call it my core life crisis, because I was just like in a cubicle and I was just like, is this what you do? You just like do this for 40 years and you die? It sounds terrible. And so I found a volunteer program through Harvard University called World Teach, which basically places teachers and volunteer teachers in different countries. So I went down to Colombia and did that. And while I was down there, I definitely saw, and I come from a very privileged suburb of San Francisco. So like I really needed to like get out and see the world and experience it. And so I was able to see a lot of things. So like one of the things was kind of the intersection of social environmental justice. So I was living in Bogota, which is a huge city and with tons of issues and social inequality and environmental air quality problems. So I saw that, but I also saw some innovative solutions. Like there was this bus system called the Transmilenio, which is like a subway bus system that, because this city can't really build subways right now. So they did that instead, and just seeing like really innovative solutions to some of these problems. And then while I was down there, I also spent some time in Panama, right off the coast of so-called coast Panama, called San Blas, which is this archipelago that's kind of think of it as like an indigenous reservation community where these people called Laguna live, and they've been there, pre-Columbian, and they invite kind of tourists to come and stay there, and that's how they generate revenue. And so I was able to go there. It was really cool. It's super beautiful. Imagine perfect beaches, islands the size of a football field, and so I got to go to one of the villages, and the guides were telling us, and so this was 2011. They were telling us like, yeah, we're going to probably have to evacuate in the next decade because of climate change. And we keep forgetting that because today it's gotten so politicized, but back then, like climate was still seen as this vague thing that might happen to our grandchildren, but not necessarily now. And so that really struck me, and I was like, whoa, this is happening now. This is what I want to focus my life on, especially the human aspect, right? Just like seeing like these people have nothing to do with rising sea levels, but they're suffering the most from it. So I still remember, I still have this journal entry. I've been journaling since I was like 11. It's kind of funny to go back and read this. Not like every day, but like more or less consistently. I still remember writing my travel journal. I really want to like work in the green. I called it the green economy. I didn't even know what that meant. And I want to apply my writing skills to help the world or whatever. And so I came back, and that led me to Sustainable Brands. And then I kind of discovered the whole corporate sustainability world at one of the first conferences there. And then I was really hooked. And then I started writing for Green Biz and wrote for them for about a decade. I ended up going back to grad school. So basically, it was just like one thing led to the next. And then I kind of just figured out like, okay, like I applied my writing skills as a journalist to learn about sustainability from a high level. And then eventually I kind of transitioned over to the consulting side. And then meanwhile, I always kind of wanted to do my own thing. My dad was a small business owner. And so 3.5 years ago, I started Higher Impact, where I could really kind of do my own thing. And we're post-COVID world is just, I think it's such an amazing, I mean, there's a lot of difficulties right now with AI and things like that, but I think it's never been a better time to be an entrepreneur because there's just so many tools, and like COVID changed the game. I have clients all over the world. Like they don't care where I am. I'm in Sacramento. I have clients in the Bay Area or in New York or DC. And meanwhile, there's all these tools that allow us to run businesses that normally would have taken a whole team. And so it's kind of like everything kind of coalesced right at the same time. And then that also kind of led me to like, yeah, this is a good time to write a book. And so that's a long-winded answer, but going back to the original question, just kind of we were kind of talking about before we hit record. So many of our challenges in sustainability are not technical, really. We kind of know what we need to do, more or less. Not every solution has been developed yet, but we have a lot of the answers already, but we just don't do them. We don't implement them. And that's one of the key arguments in the book, is that this is not an informational problem, really. It's a motivational problem. And that's where storytelling comes in. Because humans were motivated by stories. Data is part of that. Data can tell stories, but data alone is not enough. But the problem is, I think a lot of people, they think of storytelling as being fluffy and not substantive, which is why I came up, and we'll probably get into this later, it came up with this framework for kind of making sure that your stories are substantive and are not just fluffy, meaningless nothingness. So that's my answer.
Awesome.
Okay, well now, Mike, we're going to try to sum up a little bit about what it is that you actually do.
Okay, I'd love to hear it. This will see if my marketing's doing a good job. So we'll see if you guys.
How is your storytelling?
As of today, a published author.
Yes.
Mike Hauer is a sustainability communication and reporting expert, author, podcast host, and founder of Hauer Impact. As a former journalist for outlets like Green Biz, he brings perspective from both sides of the podium to help companies translate sustainability strategy into effective storytelling. And I have to say, Mike, like, I really love your whole trajectory. I actually think it makes perfect sense. I don't know why you think it's nonlinear. We had Kim Chappell on from Bobby for our 50th episode, and she also comes from a journalism background. And now she's the chief brand officer at Bobby. And I think having that journalistic integrity and knowing how to tell a good story and really do that investigative journalism and all of that makes for better storytelling. It makes for stronger sustainability work too. It's just very cool to see how a journalist can pivot in a really smart new way.
Thanks. Yeah, I agree. And there's quite a few, like my friend Aman Singh, who's at Kenview. I had her on my podcast recently. We actually have a very similar background. She was also at Edelman and also a journalist. She was a real journalist, though. She worked for the Wall Street Journal. But yeah, I think especially in today's day and age, curiosity is so critical. I'm not saying that just like regular PR people or comms people aren't curious, but I feel like having that healthy skepticism, I never lose it. Especially with my clients, like I think they appreciate that I'm not just a yes guy that just says whatever they want to hear. Like
that's
if they
not
can
why
convince,
they hired you.
Yeah, exactly. And if they can convince me, and I'm putting on my journalist hat, then they know it's going to resonate. I'm not just like, oh, that's great. That's not that my personality type either. But even if you weren't a journalist, you can learn these skills, which my book does talk about. Like, you don't have to go be a journalist to be curious and learn how to ask the right questions. I think everybody, especially since we're kind of moving into this era now, where like the other day I was just doing research of like, how is AI going to change comms? And one of the things is like really position yourself as the strategic thinker versus just the implementer. And you still need to know how to write well and produce things, but the companies are going to be hiring you mainly for your brain that can't be replicated, at least not yet.
Right. Yeah. Well, I love how you gave some tips in the book too about how to optimize for AI and making sure that obviously consistency in messaging is always key. But even and across all of, investor relations, but also consumers, right? It's the same message, and press, same message, but depending on who your audience is, you're obviously going to tailor it differently.
We're so excited to have this conversation because so much of what we talk about, at least something that I've been preaching for a while, is that climate has a communications problem, or we'd all already be doing this. We wouldn't have some of these issues. And so many of these solutions do exist. So how do we get that across to people in a way that every individual is doing their part, the companies are doing their part, to become so politicized? So being able to communicate this on all these levels, which I think is actually where Steph left off of, like how the messaging needs to be different depending on the audience, which is a lot of what it's talked about in the book, is so important. And so there is such an opportunity to educate people across the board on how to do this better. So we're excited to get into it. With that, I imagine we already know the answer to this, but maybe it's different. What issue area are you most passionate about?
So it's interesting. You saw in the book, but the way that I mainly define sustainability these days, it's social, environmental, and governance. So it's kind of like, and this is where ESG gets conflated with it, and it's different. But basically, we're not just talking about environmental issues. We're talking about how a company manages material, which is basically just a fancy word for important issues that impact their financial performance. That could be human rights. It could be gender pay equity, employee engagement, and obviously climate change is big for a lot of companies. And so in the book, I talk a lot about making sure that you're what I call a sustainability storytelling assessment is basically figuring out like, what are the issues you actually, there's a million issues you can talk about. You can talk about everything. And this is something that we saw, I think more like around 2020 in the book. I call that the beginning of the ESG golden age. So that BlackRock CEO, Larry Fink, sent out his famous letter to investors, equating climate risk to business risk. Then all of a sudden, at the time, I was at another agency, and a lot of so many companies were calling saying, hey, we need help with sustainability reporting. And most of them hadn't done anything yet. This was also around the time when George Floyd was murdered, and every company was putting out something about diversity, equity, inclusion, but a lot of them haven't done anything. They just put out, oh, we support racial equality, but they had zero strategy. And so I think
nothing to back it up with.
And still many of them have zero strategy.
Well, they still don't. Well, and
or have just walked away from it entirely.
Exactly. Now we're seeing, because they thought, oh, like the cultural zeitgeist is heading that direction now. So we have to seem like we're on board. And now I think a year ago there was, and the media is just crazy, like the year ago, they're like, oh no, actually Gen Z, they're all conservatives. And then all the businesses are like, oh, now we can't show that we're like quote unquote woke. And it's a bunch of ridiculousness. But the point is, it doesn't mean that like a company shouldn't support racial equality and communicate on that necessarily, but you can't just put out communication on topics that you have no credibility to talk about. So a lot of these companies would have been better off, instead of just putting out some stupid meme or Instagram post. They could have been, hey, let's, the bare minimum, make some kind of donation, but better than that, take a look at their operations. Like, okay, like how many women are on our board? How many people of color are on our board? But that's a lot harder to do. And
that requires work.
So I think,
and a real investment in your people,
right?
And
And so I think to me, I guess going back to what am I passionate about, I think everything, but I think to me, it's really just being real, telling a real story. You know, think about when you watch your favorite show on Netflix or read a book, you don't want to, the story about a perfect protagonist is boring. You don't want to be like, oh, you know, the hero just was fine and perfect and nothing happened in the end. That's boring. We want the story about the organization that tried to do the right thing and messed up or made mistakes and failed and learned and then continued to
took
move forward.
accountability for it.
100%. And
started the journey towards redemption. Yeah.
So this comes into conflict with you guys have all worked with corporations, so you know how they operate. The traditional kind of like Mad Men approach to marketing comms is kind of like swindle people and make your brand seem awesome and downplay anything that's bad. And I think that still kind of like permeates a lot of how marketing and comms people think. And that was also predicated in an era when companies had perfect control over all of the communication. You put out a press release or you put out an ad campaign.
Yeah.
For the past 20 years, especially since the internet's been big and social media has been big, like that's been gone, where anybody with a smartphone can expose if you're using human slavery in your supply chain. And so it kind of creates this, there's a term, I didn't come up with this, but a lot of people in my space use the term radical transparency, which is basically just like show everything, show all your cards, because the truth's going to come out anyway. So you might as well get ahead of it. And because I think a lot of, and some companies do get away with hiding it for a while because they're thinking short term, but long term, most likely things are going to come out. And also like, you're better off owning up to it now than it's surprising you later. And so again, the way that companies operate, they don't think, I mean, this is also a time on the book, is like, we're not rational actors. Companies are not rational actors. Everybody likes to say the private sector is only like, it's not emotional, but it's like 100% emotional and human driven, at least for now, until AI takes over everything. So I'm very fascinated about that. But I guess if we were going to narrow down to a specific topic, I would say climate change, like a lot of people, I think, to me, because it touches so many of these different things that I care about. And it's such a perfect communications challenge because, again, like I talk about in the book, we evolved to deal with clear and present dangers, not the tiger coming at us. Do we fight? Do we run? Do we have enough food for the winter? Climate is so vague and spread out and diffuse, and everybody is to blame. Like all of us are to blame. We're all causing climate change every day. Like
totally.
We drive our cars, like just being alive. And so we're all
recording on the internet right now. Those files have to go somewhere.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean we're evil. This is also why I'm a big proponent of this is systemic. You know, like I eat red meat occasionally. I drive a car. I don't think being vegan and perfect, like personal choices matter to a degree, but like it really is a drop in the bucket.
To change to have a bigger effect.
And I think that's been the issue especially the last 10 or 20 years. There's been a big push, I mean, intentionally, a lot of certain interests that want this to be the way things are. They've made it like, oh, it's all about consumer choice and voting with your dollars does matter. That's important. But that doesn't give these other companies that are causing 90% of emissions like a free pass. And so there's a balance there. But
marketing at work again.
100%. Yeah. And I think that's what I tried to do with this book was kind of draw attention to that. Like, comms is not just like clever copy or making things sound good. It's how do you convince how do you persuade? How do you actually create change? And that's because that's how we're going to create change. It's through persuasion.
Right. And we're being convinced of things already anyways. So why not use that in a way that can have a positive impact instead of a negative impact on
and I don't know if you guys read the chapter on the history yet, but
it was fascinating.
That was my next book might actually just be about the history because there was a lot there. But you're seeing that comms has already been weaponized against climate. So the fossil fuel industry, and maybe they'll sue me for this, but the document. Well, no, not even that, but even just like they've known about this since well before all of us were born. And then they learned, especially in the 90s, that if that's spreading disinformation, placing BS ads it's the same playbook that the tobacco industry used. If you guys ever saw Merchants of Doubt or read Merchants of Doubt, to win, they don't need to actually persuade anybody. They just need to create doubt about climate being a problem. Or now we're getting more so where it's like you can't really deny that it's a problem, but now they're just like, well, the solutions are going to hurt more than climate. And so there's a never ending excuse from them. But
I was thinking about the communications problem, right, that we have and about how in that chapter about the history, we're talking about like smoking as women, specifically women.
Oh, yeah. Wasn't it?
As an empowerment tool.
So think
about where all of that's gone now. It's just,
I'll have to send you guys the earlier draft because I went into more detail, but that's another reason why I was like, I have to write a chapter on the history of comms and sustainability because they're so intertwined. Because as we saw in the chat,
was created by it too.
Exactly. And like the
plastic industry.
Well,
Yeah.
that too. And the first professional PR professionals were hired because during the end of the 1900s, when there was intense inequality and the billionaires were just causing all this damage, they needed PR people to solve the
Deja
problems.
vu?
And then then like you saw in the ad chapter, so then meanwhile, all this science around like human psychology came out and it was weaponized. And because women were making a lot of the household consumer choices, some of these ads, like, they're laughable by today's standards,
Yeah.
but there was one that was like the original Listerine. You know the term always a bridesmaid, never a bride?
Yeah.
Yes,
That was a
dear.
Listerine slogan saying like, if you have bad breath, you probably won't find a man or something. And it's really targeting women to make them feel inadequate. That was the original ads that were doing that. And that also led to later to the rise of ad standards. Now we have all this advertising law that protects against this kind of stuff, which actually is tied to a lot of greenwashing legislation now.
Yeah.
So it's all connected, but I thought it was really fascinating doing that deep dive.
Well,
it is. It truly is.
Speaking of turning the industry and flipping the script for a second, let's talk about an impactful project you've worked on that you're super proud of. And I'm going to throw it out there that, based on the book and how it seems like one of your best case studies, one of your most awesome clients is Mars. But if there's somebody else that you want to talk about, have at.
Yeah, so Mars is near and dear to me also because they were my first big client when I started my own shop. And so I've worked with tons of companies over the years, from the North Face, HP, and other companies. And then Mars was, I like to call them my anchor client. When I started Howard Impact, I didn't really have a big plan. I was just like, I'm just going to put myself out there. And then I actually happened to know Dan Strechay is a friend of mine. He's now at PepsiCo, but he was basically the head of sustainability comms at Mars. And at the time, he's like, oh, I heard you're available. We need some help we're launching our net zero strategy and we need comm support, storytelling support, getting it out there. And so I was like, that sounds intriguing. And so he brought me on as fractional, which I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with that term now. And so that project, what was really fun about it was that Mars they're all in on it. And again, we'll preface that with that they're private. So it's a little bit easier for a private company because the Mars family, their business has been around for over a century. Mars has. And they've always been pioneering social good and thinking about that as they do business. Their tagline is the world we want. I'm probably going to butcher this. The world we want tomorrow starts with the business we do today, that kind of stuff. And so they had C-suite buy-in. The family was based.
It needs to start from the top, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise it's all garbage.
Exactly. And it does become, and I talk about this in the book a little bit too, that, I mean, it can go both ways. You could have a, private company that doesn't care and then nothing happens. Because sometimes being public can be good when your shareholders are pressuring you to do more, but also when your shareholders aren't, then there's less pressures. And boards I have a whole chapter where I basically say this is all rooted in survey data. Most boards self-report that they don't really know anything about sustainability yet are responsible for basically making all these decisions about sustainability, which is another service that I do provide. Companies can bring me in to help educate their boards too, which is something that I could do. So with Mars, basically the challenge was, so they've been working on their net zero plan for years. And for those who are listening who aren't familiar with net zero terminology, essentially means that a company is committing to generally science-based targets. Just means that they're working with the Science-Based Targets Initiative to determine what their carbon reductions need to be to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement, which is the landmark international treaty of 2015 that President Trump pulled us out twice, but that's a whole other thing. Oh, I know you don't want to get political. I'll get political in a day.
Oh no, I mean it's all political, right, Mike? Like, how can it not be? It's already that it's political.
Yeah, we don't need to go there right now. But anyway,
it's a whole other episode.
So net zero means that you actually have to have a plan to decarbonize, not just by what are called. Again, I'm just throwing a bunch of jargon out here, but carbon offsets are essentially companies can pay to offset their carbon emissions without actually investing in renewable energy or energy efficiency. So basically, they've done all the strategy, they've done all the technical work. So they've had this kind of technical draft of like, here's our net zero plan. And then what they were like, okay, we need to figure out how we're going to put this in a format that regular people will understand, because they're, consumer facing brand, like how our consumers can understand it.
Yeah.
And then there was a whole campaign around like a website. So I was just one part of a bigger team, but the whole Mars team, corporate affairs team, was working on this. But one of the things they specifically had me do was they kind of gave me the technical document and said, okay, Mike, we need you to put on your journalist hat and help us turn this into something that you don't have to be a scientist to understand. And that's kind of my bread and butter, where, I'm not the guy that creates the data tables, but I can understand the data and translate the data and in terms that different stakeholders understand. And so that was the kind of the fun challenge around that. And that was similar to what I guess anybody like I do with sustainability reporting, or anybody that does standard reporting, that's essentially the job. where you're kind of balancing like technical papers with something investors might want to read or consumers might read. So then that resulted in this really cool document it's online. You can find it on their website. That's well designed. Yeah. So that was the main document. And then we also developed a consumer facing website. And with Mars, what I think what was really effective about that first was like the actual substance behind it. So beyond just saying here is net zero goals, they were like, we're going to put $1 billion towards this, which is huge.
Yeah.
And they're basically like, we're going to do whatever it takes because this is not like a feel good. That's why I don't even like using the term impact campaign, because impact makes it sound like it's not business aligned necessarily. And to me, it's like, this is all for benefiting the business. This isn't philanthropy. Like,
do you want to be in business in 10, 20, 50 years?
Yeah. Correct. And Mars is a great example where they actually, their business grew while they decarbonized. So this idea that you can't, and it's not always such a slam dunk. For example, pre-AI, I worked at some data center companies and it was already a problem then where they're like, how do we hit net zero when we're growing? And now with AI, that's a whole other problem. Well, I'm not going to get into that today. So anyways, and what was great about that came into was areas of communication. This is generally how I advise companies about, you want to make sure you have substantive messaging, but at the same time, if it's too technical, too jargony, no one's going to read a technical paper.
Yeah.
But then some stakeholders some of your more savvier investors might want to see that. So the Frontline homepage was kind of more of a consumer facing website that had more human stories that most people could kind of understand and be interested in. And then if you wanted to dig deeper, you could click, okay, read more. And then there were more kind of the technical papers that kind of showed the work. And so it was a really good manifestation of what ultimately became what I call the 4 C's effective sustainability storytelling, which is context, compelling, credible, and compliant. So contextual being like ensuring that you're not just putting out your messaging into the void. Like something that you communicate in California is going to go land differently than maybe in Arkansas or in certain countries. There's different cultural norms, especially when you're communicating social issues. And a lot of corporate communication is really rooted in kind of Western kind of ideology and morality. And so I do touch on this in the book because I'm like, well, it doesn't give you if you're in a country where maybe human rights violations are more tolerated, that doesn't make it okay. So there's universal human rights that you need to adhere to, but still be aware of that, right? Like I use an example in the book where Nike had this Be True campaign that was around LGBTQ rights, and Russia is notoriously anti-LGBTQ, and for various reasons, it's pretty much illegal to be gay there, which is insane. And so Nike, I think this was right before the Ukraine invasion, but Nike stood up for it. They said, well, you don't have to buy our products. And then they eventually pulled out when Russia invaded Ukraine anyway. But yeah, if you're in a country where 80% of the people are like, we don't support LGBTQ rights to exist, like a DEI campaign is probably not going to land as well there, right? So it creates these issues. So what do you do? There is something about balancing, respecting local cultures, but then there's also universal human. So the book talks a little bit about this, where it's like, you just can't ignore it. I don't have the answer to it, but you have to think about this. Totally. And other pieces of context would be like, your industry reputation. So like if you're in a dirtier industry, even if you're doing a lot of good work, you're going to have more skepticism that you're facing. If your company's got a bad reputation, whether it's earned or not, that's going to impact it. Likewise, there's something called the halo effect, where some companies are seen as good when they're not necessarily doing a lot of stuff. And so basically making sure that your sustainability, substance, and story are aligned is really important. And then compelling, that's what people traditionally think about when they think about comms is, I like to say it's not about just making it sound good. It's about how do you develop messages that resonate with human motivations and actually make people want to change. So in that chapter, we go into human psychology and also the media environment, which is completely fragmented compared to when it was like 50 years ago, where by fragmented, I mean, 50 years ago, you had Walter Cronkite giving the news to almost everybody. You had like 3 news stations and maybe a few newspapers. And today, anyone can pick any news outlet they want. Social media is making it insane. So this is why we're kind of living in different realities. Like someone who watches Fox News is living in a completely different universe than someone who's reading the New York Times or doing something else. So even if you're putting your messages out into the world, they're being filtered differently. And it doesn't mean like you're in trouble and it's hopeless, but you have to account for that. And then credible, that's essentially making sure that you're actually just doing what you're saying you're doing, which sounds simple, but for many years, companies were just being very aspirational with their language and just saying, oh, we're going to make the world better. But okay, well, how? And then do you have any proof that you're doing that? And making sure that you're showing that. But the problem is that sometimes when sustainability teams who run that pillar are like overly in charge, they might get too into the weeds and it turns into a technical paper, and then it loses its compellingness. And the final is compliant, which a lot of my clients are worried about, and a lot of corporations are dealing with now, which is How do you avoid greenwashing, lawsuit risks? And then the regulatory environment's constantly changing. There's tons of European legislation that's impacting how companies disclose sustainability information and whatnot. So anyway, all of those 4 pillars are just considerations as you're developing your storytelling to make sure that there's a good balance. Because if you go too far in one pillar and at the expense of the other, you're going to come into trouble. And it's not easy to do. And it's not, so that's why the book talks about some strategies for approaching that, but it's not like one and done. It's like you're constantly tinkering and making sure that you're doing the right thing. But underpinning it all is radical transparency.
Yeah. It's real. So real. I mean, that in and of itself is a challenge.
Yes.
What would you say is the biggest challenge you're facing right now? Do you see greenwashing as being the biggest challenge facing climate comms at the moment? Or what would you say you're finding most challenging at the moment?
Yeah, I think it's greenwashing for sure. I've made that my big push this year with my Substack, my LinkedIn content, where I'm calling for what I call courageous sustainability communication. And the thing is, though, I get it. I have friends who work at these big companies and they would love to be doing more, but we have to talk about politics because it's not really politics. It's deeper than that now.
Yeah.
I have friends who work at big corporations where they've got multi-billion-dollar contracts with the federal government that if they say something that Trump doesn't like and he says pull their contract, that's bad.
Yep.
And I also learned this recently from another person who used to work at a big CPG firm, which I didn't know until she told me. They can do more than just pull your contract. They can actually, I think it's called clawing back. So they can actually demand, there's multiple factors of the money. So let's say you have a $4 billion contract, they could maybe demand like 3x that. And that's just rough. So this is untreaded territory that we're in right now, where never in history have we had such a dictatorial government in the White House where they're weaponizing all this stuff that should never be weaponized. And again, I'm also very active on this stuff already. So it's not something I've said before, but the problem with companies now is they're so from the short term that it's kind of creates this prisoner's dilemma, right? Where if every company spoke out against this stuff, the administration would probably back down because they're a bunch of cowards really at the end of the day. I like to call them like fascist cowards because they all kind of know if they don't get what they want, which is basically overturn democracy in the US, like they're all going to jail, but they're also kind of trying to be 1 foot in, 1 foot out. But what's happened is so many companies in thinking, oh, if we keep our head down, if we appease them, maybe we'll just ride this one out like we did last time.
Yeah.
That hasn't been working. And I think more and more companies now, especially since the tides are kind of turning now politically, there's a little bit more courage, but it's definitely been disappointing to see like, come on, guys, you've been talking about this for years and years, that this is business relevant and important. And you're just like, because you're worried about losing the $4 billion is a lot of money, but so is undermining the rule of law in America, which is what makes free markets possible. But this isn't how companies operate. They're very myopic, and every individual at a company might individually want to change, but all the internal incentives don't align to create that change. So like my friend, if he puts out a press release that leads to $4 billion loss, he's going to lose a job. So why would he do that?
And then it doesn't help anybody in the end because then there's nobody to push this forward. But at least if you can push the work forward internally, even if you're not talking about it, as long as the work that actually helps save the planet in the grand scheme of things and is actually protecting people in the grand scheme of things is still happening.
Right. Just because people aren't shouting it from the rooftops anymore doesn't mean that it's not happening. Of course, if they were green shouting, right, then obviously then you get the brand loyalty, by the way. You get the like all the other you hate that term.
Well, no, I forget who was it. The climate creatives. I'm not sorry, no hate from them, but I'm so sick of people coming up with another G word. We don't need more buzzwords. And green shouting.
Can we just say the damn thing?
And green shouting just basically just communicate. It's not something novel. Just do what you're supposed to be doing.
Just communicate. Period.
Yeah, exactly. But then beyond the political piece, part of the challenge too is like my clients, the ones who hire me directly are usually the sustainability teams who are more focused on, like, that's why a lot of my business these days is reporting because that's what they're being measured against. And I do talk about this in the book where often the strategic comms work is still being delegated to the corporate comms people who are more comms generalists. And so they don't always see sustainability or recognize sustainability as an actual business driver. There's still this perception that it's philanthropy or feel good stuff. It's not like this is a real core part of our corporate narrative. And that's another reason I wrote this book, because I'm hoping someone can read this book and be like, oh, wait a minute, this is actually something we need to be integrating more into our broader messaging. That's also a business challenge for me, is where like I'll be working with the sustainability team and they're like, yeah, we want to do a better job with our storytelling, but then they don't have the budget to do more than just the reporting. And so then I need to either get my tentacles into the comms or marketing team and then help. But it's still an educational piece. I still struggle with clients where their comms people they just do not see it. Because if you're not in this work every day, it's really hard to really get the nuance, which again, I talk about in the book.
Yes, so much.
And so if I'm talking to a CMO and I'm like, you should be investing in all the sustainability comms, it's going to be a much harder sell. And so I think that's a challenge too, that I see as a consultant. It's not just me. I think it's across the board right now. And then oftentimes you have kind of bigger PR firms that kind of retain for just the general story, but then they might have some sustainability specialists, but there's very few people that are in the book. I call them formal sustainability communicators. And so,
it's usually a volunteer or
or like a site. And so, I think that is one of the problems with why storytelling struggles, because there's just there's nobody responsible for it who has the ability to really do a good job, which is why my book is hopefully going to help address that, at least to a degree.
This has been my thing since leaving direct commercial production. From my perspective, what I would always see is it doesn't seem like internally any departments talk to each other, right? I've always seen this as one of the biggest challenges, is that it seems like sustainability is over here, social impact seems to be in a department over here, marketing's over here, like
everyone's
nobody's actually talking to each other. And marketing's putting out things that's not actually what's happening internally. And that's because the agency had some genius idea that they think this should do this or whatever, but no one's actually talking. And even when I've worked internally agencies, it just doesn't seem like it's a cohesive conversation, let alone obviously the person who's the expert on being able to have these conversations, but both for that internal piece of getting everyone internally on board and then externally, whether it's to your consumers or to your board or to whatever. So it just, again, confirms and validates all those things. And I don't know, do you have a solution? That's what I'm
One of the chapters is about cross-functional alignment, and it is a challenge, because I think also sustainability teams, their remit is to think about 10 to 20 years in the future. Your typical comms marketing person is thinking what's happening this month or this quarter. And it does create, and this is something that I do talk about in the book a little bit, that I think has been the challenge with sustainability communicators, is that we're dealing with really important issues that we're passionate about. Climate needs to be addressed, but if we go to the sales team and say you got to care about this stuff, if we don't show why, they just see us as like kind of out of touch, or like, oh great, I wish I had the luxury of worrying about big issue. It's like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? All the good news is that B2B brands are increasingly, their sales teams are like actually starting to hire sustainability kind of specialists to train them, because their customers are asking in their RFPs, what are they doing for sustainability? And there's a whole chapter in the business case. So there's that piece too. But this is what to me makes it so fascinating, because this is not just about making things sound good. It's about thinking about how humans,
aligning it with business strategy and showing how it affects the bottom line, and how you can move shit forward a lot faster if you get that buy-in from the top, and if you get if you just break down these silos and say, no, this actually affects all of you, and we need to work on this together. Speaking of working on it together, I know that you've done a lot of incredible work, Mike. What would be your ideal project or collaboration?
I've actually been doing a lot of thinking about this as I've been doing this work for this business for 3.5 years. I'm always trying to think, okay, like what am I going to evolve this into? And I think a great situation would be like a company comes to me that's maybe not a leader, that's like, hey, we really want to do better. And again, I'm not the guy that would create the sustainability strategy or the carbon accounting, but I have partners that I can bring in for that. But for example, let's say they're like, okay, we've been working with a sustainability strategist to develop a really good strategy. We have a plan. We have a buy-in from leadership, or maybe they even come to me like, we need your help getting that buy-in. But basically taking a company from like a novice to a leader, I think would be really awesome. And maybe it takes several years, and then gets to that highest, like I talk about in the book, the chapter on aligning government affairs, takes them to the highest level of sustainability communication, which is actually aligning with what they're doing with where their dollars are going and policy and things like that. I think that would be really cool to help them tell a full story from doing not the greatest. That, I don't know, maybe that will happen or not happen, but I'm ever the cynical optimist, I'd like to say. And it's going to swing back. We're in a dark time right now, but we're already seeing the tides are turning, and there's a lot of BS in this country right now and a lot of misinformation, but you can't argue with the fact that the planet, literally lives are being destroyed by the environmental destruction. I've already been seeing, I can't verify this, but the Trump administration rolling back certain air quality rules is already leading to smog returning. People forget when my dad was in LA in the 70s. Are you guys in LA? I don't remember.
I am.
Like in this, my dad was.
I was.
Well, when my dad was,
grew up-
when my kid was in LA in the 70s, we were just used to it. Just
Right.
the air was
Yep.
crappy. And I think it's the same kind of problem we're seeing with the
Yeah.
whole anti-vaccine thing, where there was a really good article in the Atlantic the other day by this woman who's 83. And she's like, when I was a kid, kids just died from polio and like, or they were like
My grandma's
ruined
brother
for
had it his
life.
entire life. Yep.
Yeah. And then it was a miracle when these vaccines came
Yeah.
out. And then all of a sudden, like,
We forget how good our life is right now
Yeah.
because of these things that have been in place that have made it so.
Yeah. And that's
Yeah.
exactly, so it's similar. And I think that's, we're in this period now, even right now, like, well, do we need environmental protection? Because look how clean stuff is. It's like, yeah, because do you remember that there was,
Do you remember
the rivers-
COVID when we could actually
Well-
hear the birds in the like in the trees?
yeah, but like rivers
Nature
used
came
to
back,
be on
no one drove
fire
anywhere.
pre-1970, pre-Earth Day, pre-US EPA. Rivers were regularly on fire in the US. And well, it's still not perfect, but we've had it relatively good because of these
Yeah,
rules,
comparatively,
and the
yeah.
economy has still grown. And but there's enough bad players out there that are just like, they don't care, and they just have no, in my opinion, they're just bad human beings. But I think
Yeah.
there's more good human beings out there, and I think that's getting that story right is part of it, of showing people this is not, like I talk about in the book, environmentalism is not a political issue. We all
No.
want healthy, clean air and water, and we don't want to have climate destroy our lives.
wanna win.
I'm about to become a father. It's making me
Yeah.
even realize even more. I'm watching this little girl grow over 9 months in my wife's belly. Life is so precious, and it's so, even people that are like on this other side of the political spectrum, they still had to grow in someone's belly at some point, and we're all humans.
Right.
And ultimately was made humanity survive. And this isn't just me, what I believe. This is science. Like, we're not the strongest species. We're not even necessarily the smartest species, but we're the only species that's really been able to come together and take care of each other over like, the eons. And I do think deep down, that's who we are. Altruism is really in our DNA. And a lot of things that made us forget that. And especially in the US, we're in this survival of the fittest mindset is not who we are. And we're going to really need to evolve as a species to really rise to these challenges.
Yeah. Yes to all of that. And I think community and rebuilding that connection and trust is a lot of where the world is going right now too. So hopefully that helps move us forward as well. And on that though, what is one piece of advice, this little send off? What's one piece of advice? Because we know your book is full of more than one. And we will obviously include the link and send people there to read and take in all the knowledge. But what's the first piece of advice you give someone that's looking to incorporate more of these communication techniques and improve their communication around sustainability and this impactful work, or pushing forward to get this work done within their companies, whether it's internally or externally? Where would you tell people to start?
I would say, especially if you're in a company, you're trying to create change, it's always starting from a position of like curiosity and how you can be helpful. And one of my good friends, he tells me this all the time, he's very successful as a sustainability communicator. He's always like, how can I help you? He's not coming in like, I need you to do this for me. And that internal, and this generally my approach to life and was like, I'm very much like, I just help people and then enough comes back. Not everybody returns it, but enough people do. And like, a lot of things require very little effort to help. And I think that works too in big corporations because they move really fast. There's a lot of priorities that sometimes conflict. But I think if you, as a communications or comms person or sustainability person, if you can position yourself as that reliable, trustworthy, helpful person, that's going to create that foundation of trust that you're going to really need to create that change.
Yeah. Love that.
I love it.
With that, we're going to play us out. Oh, no, go. Sorry, Steph, go.
No, I just want that to sink in a little bit because it's, you're about to become a dad. There's so many changes happening, and you just need to remember that it's about building trust and feeling courageous enough to make that change that you want to see and to make the world a little bit better for your little girl. And that's the real why of all of this shit, right?
Totally. Well, I don't know if you guys read the conclusion, but I cried. I was writing that. It's like, great. Because I found out that my daughter was coming, like right when I wrote the, I had to, and if you haven't read the conclusion, read it after this.
Steph will start crying now. So
but it was really sweet.
The one thing I talk about is like, this is not going to be solved. We're not going to see that future that we're trying to create here. Like, this is an ongoing thing. And it doesn't give us license to just say, oh, kick the can down the road. But like, we need to have the humility to know that we're trying to build a world that is better for people that are going to come after us. Whether or not you have kids, like I felt this way before I had kids. And I don't think you have to have kids to feel this way, but like, we're here for a very limited time and we can create ripple effects that are either really positive or negative. And maybe we do a little bit of both. But like, my goal is ultimately my ripple effects are more positive beyond my years. And I think that's the best that we can ask for.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much, Mike. Can you also share where can folks learn more about your work?
Yeah, you can go to powerimpact.com. My website's got tons of stuff there. I've got a Substack called The Sustainability Story that's free that I put out a lot of my thoughts. Because again, I'm trying to put out all of this so everyone can benefit. If you're interested in supporting my work, buying the book is always helpful, or telling a friend about the book or colleague about the book. Or if you hear of a colleague, whoever needs support sustainability comms or reporting, referrals are kind of lifeblood of my business. So feel free to do that.
Perfect. We'll include all those links in our show notes.
Sounds good.
Fantastic. Thank you, Mike, for joining us and for shining a light and learning from those who are doing it well and reducing the missed opportunities for good.
We want to hear from you. Please let us know, what campaigns are you seeing that are doing it well? Who would you like to see us interview? And what campaign would you like us to audit?
Thank you to our listeners, to our YouTube subscribers, to our Substack readers. And thank you to our guests of Creative Conversations for helping us to revolutionize the industry that we love.
Missed Opportunities for Good is a production of Alliance for Impact and Love of Good.